welcome to another edition of A Day in the House. I'm your host, State Representative Michael Day. Thanks for joining us here today on WinCam. And today we're going to discuss a topic that's at the top of most headlines here in Massachusetts, and that's vaping. We know about the recent health emergency declared by Governor Baker. I'm here with two guests who are very close to the e-cigarette issue and epidemic here in society. And let me do that, introduce them now. First, I want to welcome Dennis Mahoney. Dennis is going into his fourth year as principal of Winchester High School. He's a man of the people, an exceptional hockey player, and an even better principal. A true leader, a pillar in the community, and a local icon. He hopes that all of his students at Winchester High School find their happiness and explore their passions. Dennis, welcome.
Good to be here. That's quite an introduction.
And Cheryl Sabara. Cheryl's a Winchester resident, a terrific leader. She's a senior staff attorney and director of policy and law for the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards. In that capacity, Cheryl provides technical assistance and legal education to the 351 local boards of health in Massachusetts, all of whom have the legal authority to pass local public health laws, including laws relative to the sale of tobacco and vaping products. As I said, she's a Winchester resident and has been a longtime leader in the effort to curb teen smoking and tobacco use. Cheryl, Dennis, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you both here. So I had indicated we're going to start this discussion focused on e-cigarettes and vaping. And I was hoping, Cheryl, you could just provide the viewers who don't know what e-cigarettes are or vaping are, a little background on what it is.
Sure. Electronic cigarettes were initially proposed as an alternative to smoking a traditional combustible cigarette. So they're basically a vaporizer with a battery that heats up liquid that becomes aerosolized, and a person using one inhales the liquid and then exhales the liquid. The challenge, and they look different. They used to look a lot like cigarettes. Then we had them looking more like bongs, if you remember those from the olden days.
I've heard of them.
And now they can look like almost anything. And the challenge with them is that they are not regulated by any governmental agency, federally, on a state level. In Massachusetts, they are regulated somewhat locally in where you can buy them, et cetera.
Yeah, we've seen, just picking up on the what they look like, one of the issues we had earlier on that we're still dealing with is you've got something like Juul, which is the leader of the market right now. Looks like a USB flash drive for parents. When these first came on the market, they looked like something you plug into your computer.
They still do.
They still do. But people are now a little more aware of them. When they first came out, people were saying, oh, I don't know what my children are walking around with and putting a flash drive in their mouth for.
It's actually gone beyond that at this point. Most parents and families wouldn't be able to identify them unless they were really, really sharp. And you're not going to find them in a bedroom. They're too small. You're not going to find them in a backpack. It looks like any other device. But they're actually expanded in the last couple of years. We've seen sweatshirts where the drawstring in a sweatshirt is the device. Huh. And so you can just be chewing on it looks like the string of a sweatshirt, a hooded sweatshirt, and that's the actual vaping device. So they're making clothes in order to make it even a subtler.
To detect.
Yeah.
And they're odorless, right? I mean, when they come out, it's...
And they're also, what's so insidious about the Juul product that the principal is talking about is that it contains a liquid that contains nicotine salts. 5% of the product is a nicotine salt. And the reason that's so important is, number one, because it's a salt, it doesn't produce the same vape that you get out of other vaping products, so it's easier to use in a school setting. And the percentage, the 5% percentage, is illegal, for instance, in the UK. You can't sell a Juul that has that much nicotine in it because it's actually the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes. And we have some kids that are smoking 2 to 3 of these a day and are getting what's called NICSIC, and I'm sure you probably have seen it, where they are having seizures and sweating, shaking
from the amount of nicotine
going in, because when it goes in, they experience this immediate high, this rush from this really potent amount of nicotine.
Just a point of clarification, we have not seen that.
You're lucky.
I do feel lucky. And they are you typically odorless, but they can have a sweet smell depending on the flavor and things that are in the actual device.
And I remember when they first started hitting the marketplace, and you'd hear, if you want to help, it helps stopping smoking, turn to the vape.
Right.
It's not it's a smoking cessation possibility, but it's not a non-addictive.
Well,
alternative, right?
what's interesting is initially when these products first came out, the FDA attempted to regulate them as cessation devices. And they started going through the process of having these companies apply for certification. And the vaping industry sued the FDA and said, no, these are not cessation products. We do not want to be regulated as a cessation product. And the industry won the lawsuit. The FDA did not appeal. So now we are hearing from Juul that they're for adult smokers to assist adult smokers in quitting. But what we're seeing is that 3% of adult smokers are using vaping products, while 20% of high school students are using these products. So clearly it's become a product that's much more attractive, especially the flavored products, for high school and middle school students than it is for adults. So if an adult wants to quit using a vaping product, great, but there's no need for an adult to have unfettered access to these products. They can get them at adult-only retail tobacco stores, not at every convenience store located in Winchester or Stoneham or
Gas
anywhere
station,
else.
yeah.
Gas stations. So if an adult wants to do that, be my guest.
Yeah.
But just don't have our kids exposed to the marketing of these products.
Yeah, I mean,
which is
I
what
think
they're
it's important again to
done now.
underscore they're not cessation devices. You may be able to move off of traditional smoking,
But you're still
but you're still
addicted
putting
to
the
vaping.
nicotine into your
Right.
system. And
You can move
dealing
off of
with that.
tobacco, but you're not moving off of nicotine.
Right.
And
Right.
the switch from tobacco is instead there's a good chance you're putting oil in your lungs. That makes no sense in terms of doing something healthier, going from tobacco to oil.
And the particulates in when this liquid gets heated up are ultra fine. So they're staying in your lungs for who knows how many years. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing this magnificent increase in the amount of hospitalizations for respiratory, cardiac, pulmonary hospitalizations. And the only common factor in all of these is that first of all, most of them are young people, and they've vaped. So they could have vaped THC, they could have vaped CBD, they could have vaped nicotine. If you
So just
talk with
Going back, THC being the active
THC
ingredient,
being marijuana and CBD being a hemp product.
cannabinoid, yep. And obviously, we've now got Governor Baker's proclamation that we've got a public health emergency related to vaping. He's ordered a 4-month cessation of all vaping products in Massachusetts, really in order to give, the reasoning being, give us time to figure out what's going on with these health crises. We're
What's
reading every
causing them.
day, we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these emergency room visits now, hospitalizations, and I think up to 10 deaths at this stage related, they believe, directly to vaping.
Yeah, and the Commissioner of Public Health, Massachusetts Commissioner
Burrell.
Burrell, was in D.C. yesterday testifying about what Massachusetts is doing and about the need to collaborate with the federal government. And she stated that we're seeing in Massachusetts about 10 suspected cases a day just in Massachusetts being reported to the Department of Public Health.
Dennis, in the high school level, obviously we've done yeoman's work, I think, in the last generation or so, and Cheryl, you can attest to this too, about the dangers of tobacco, of smoking. We're not there yet on the vaping education.
We're not
Fair
even
to say?
close.
No.
Well, so the saddest part is that you don't see kids smoking cigarettes.
Right.
We can't say we've accomplished or we've triumphed over it because there's still a small percentage of kids that are always going to try things that are bad for them. But for the most part, the majority, large majority, kids don't smoke cigarettes. You just don't see it. You don't hear about it. It's not a thing anymore, which is great. Your sense of pride in that. But this just filled that vacuum. That it came in at the worst possible time because the cigarette sales to minors and the usage is just plummeted, and it's not something that kids do anymore. But now they're doing this, and it's different than cigarettes because you can experiment with Juuls, you can experiment with vaping, try it socially, but kids didn't experiment too much with cigarettes anymore. Usually, if you were experimenting with cigarettes, you were smoking cigarettes, and, you started doing it more actively. With vaping, it's easier because there's very little to detect, there's very little to smell, and the accessibility is much easier than with cigarettes. So while we achieved on one level, the years and years of, in the 70s and early 80s, you could actually have a cigarette on campus at most schools. There were smoking areas where you could, be a teenager smoking next to a teacher. And that's been gone for years, at least 20 years now. But as we saw a steady decline in smoking cigarettes, and we could feel like we've accomplished something, this just came in and filled that vacuum.
And just to underscore that, in 1996, and I was working in this field back then, we had a youth smoking rate of over 30%. Now the youth smoking rate is down to 6.4%. However, to what the principal said, our e-cigarette use rate right now is over 20%. So we're basically where we were in 2003 with youth use of nicotine. So we're headed right back up. So the 2 decades worth of work that we've done will be all for naught if we don't find some way to stop this epidemic.
What are you thinking on the correlation between the rise of, if there is one, the rise of vaping devices and the legalization of marijuana? Is that, they're interchangeable, right? You can pop in a CBD pod as quickly as you can a nicotine pod.
Well, and kids, as industrious and creative as they are, have figured out how to take a Juul pod and put a THC pod into the Juul vaping product. So your product can use anything. And the governor's order extends to vaping products for marijuana.
It's all vaping.
And all vaping products.
Dennis, you had mentioned a little earlier that you've now got clothing that's designed to be vaping. What are the, and it's changing daily, I'm assuming, what we're looking at here, but I knew the Juul are probably still the market leader in devices.
And the Juul likes is what they're called now. There are all sorts of
knockoffs all the time,
of Juul.
And what are you seeing in the high school as far as those go?
So we've seen it explode. In my previous district, that was when the rise really happened. In the last 4 years, we did see a steady decline. Kids tried it, kids were experimenting. Obviously the bathrooms were the place to do it, and they still can be from time to time. But about 4 or 5 years ago, because it was odorless and we were actually vaping, not juuling, students were doing it in the classroom. Teachers at the board, you could easily get away with it because it's just water vapor in the air.
It disappears quickly.
Very quickly. Certainly on the back of a school bus or at outside activity, you can do it if your group's in PE. If you were that hardcore, you can get it done, or you could get it done fairly easily. Now people know what to look for. They know that. And the students know that teachers are watching out for it. So obviously the bathrooms become the last bastion of where you can vape in a school.
Back to the 70s again, right?
Really, it is, smoking in the boys' room, that type of thing. But we have, we've still seen a steady decline in the last few years of how many kids are congregating in the bathrooms, what we're able to confiscate, what we're able to catch. Because students they do know that it's bad for them. They have a general understanding. But teenagers are always going to take, not every teenager, but a lot of teenagers will always choose to do something that's bad for them because they're told not to do it, which is a little bit of a rite of passage of growing up. You have to learn from your mistakes. But at the same time, most of the students, at least I can only speak now for Winchester High School, our students are really smart. They're really mature. They know right from wrong, and they all typically have some lofty goals. So they don't want to screw that up, and they're typically not doing it in the school anymore. It does happen. But very much less frequently than it was happening 2, 3, especially 4 or 5 years ago. That being said, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen more often on the weekends or off campus where there's no adult monitoring.
One of the more alarming things to me is the prevalence of it in middle schools, pushing down, right? Because they're not mentally capable yet of making the decisions that some of the mature...
Neither are 18-year-olds.
Sure, but they're a little bit better equipped.
Well,
but you're looking at middle school. In Stoneham, for example, where my sons are in middle school, there's certain bathrooms they won't go to because they know the kids are going to be in there vaping. 7th, 8th graders.
Yeah. I would just having grown children now, when you have an 18-year-old, and I'm not sure you'll exactly feel the same way that you do now about your 18-year-old. I
Being
mean, their
mature.
brain, the front of their brain, the executive function piece of their brain does not develop until about 25. And that's well known, and that's why their decisions at this age are usually rash decisions. They don't think about the consequences because they're just not there yet. And I would say, and I think Winchester is one of the more lucky municipalities. They have a really robust tobacco control program, as Stoneham does as well. And we've been able to pass local regulations that prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products, restricts the sale of them to adult-only retail tobacco stores. So the availability is less in the municipalities that have done that. What we're tackling now is the most popular product, and I'm not sure if it's the same in Winchester, but it is in most places, for the Juul is the mint.
Yep.
So our
Menthol.
regulations aren't addressing the menthol mint and wintergreen flavor. And that's what we're hoping for help from the state legislature and localities taking out that exemption for the mint
And the
flavor.
interesting piece on the menthol, the mint, is that that's carved out of the flavors of tobacco. They've got an exemption, so flavored tobacco's prohibited by the FDA, by the federal government, I should
Cigarettes.
say. Flavored cigarettes, except for menthol.
Right. And that was, I'm aging myself now, but that was in 2009 when a lot of us fought against that exemption.
Yeah.
But as you well know, you don't, passing a law is similar to making sausage. You don't really want to know what's in it. And there was a compromise that
Sure.
was reached, which is why menthol, mint, and
Was carved
wintergreen
out.
were carved out.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit, Cheryl? You're around now visiting boards of health. You're going
Yes.
tonight to
North
North Andover, you had
Andover
mentioned. How much of that effort is educating the boards of health as to what they can and cannot do and what the dangers are with these?
A lot of it is that we have been doing that now. I think the first flavor restriction that was passed was in 2014 in Yarmouth. So we've been doing this for quite some time now. And we know it's the flavors that are getting to the kids. And we know that because when the industry was sued by many attorneys general to try to recoup Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement for all the tobacco-related deaths and disease, we were able to get copies of all of their documents. And when we saw their documents, right in their documents, they say a teenager is a replacement smoker. Teenagers like sweet products. We care about the flavors that kids like. So that was the rationale behind prohibiting the sale of flavored cigarettes. It's the same rationale when you go to other tobacco products, and that's what we're in the process of. Flavors mask the harshness,
Sure.
especially menthol, because it's also it's why you use a cough drop. A cough drop is usually menthol for a reason.
Yeah.
Makes it smoother.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're dealing with the flavors now on a state level, and
Yes.
thank you for the work that you've been doing. I know certainly raising us on the state level to 21 on all tobacco products from 18 up to 21, that was led from the municipalities.
Yes.
And we were able to finally get over the tipping point in the state by saying, hey, we've got the majority of municipalities going to 21. What are we doing on the state level? Let's make sure we're uniform across
Yeah,
the
and
state.
it's
here.
interesting because we always say, 351 local boards of health, all of whom have the legal authority to enact local laws.
Yeah.
And I travel around the nation and they think we're crazy. We're either crazy or we're brilliant because we do it, but locality, and we get to the
It tips the
tipping
balance at the
point
end, yeah.
where the legislature can say, all of my district has a local regulation.
Yep.
This is not a heavy
It was
lift.
certainly the case here in Stoneham, Winchester. I had the 21 in both municipalities.
Right.
Be able to go in and advocate for that going forward. And we're moving forward, I'm happy to say now, on the e-cigarette bans. No, I shouldn't say bans, on the regulations, on prohibiting and banning flavors
Right.
in e-cigarettes, on taxing e-cigarettes. Many people don't know that the vaping devices and vapes themselves aren't taxed,
They're not regulated at all.
right?
So they're not taxed, that you don't have to list the ingredients that are in them. You're really on your own when you're purchasing these products.
Dennis, on the Charlie touched a little earlier on the strength of these devices and how much kids are ingesting or inhaling without knowing, in many cases, how strong this stuff is. Are you seeing any signs are you seeing addiction among
I mean,
your
addiction
student body?
is tough to monitor.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that of the number of students that have tried it, that we don't have some students that are addicted to the product. But it's not possible for us to monitor that. Haven't seen, thank God, we haven't seen any nicotine withdrawals. Although in an email I sent out to families and students 2 days ago that was in regard to the ban, we gave information basically saying, not look for these symptoms, because we didn't want people to WebMD themselves.
Right.
Sure.
But we did say these are the resources should your student or should you start to feel that something's changing, because students might be active vapors but have no realization that they're addicted to it. They're going to tell you, well, I just like it because I like the taste, it calms me down. But there's the first part of addiction is admitting that you have the addiction, and most teenagers will be reticent to say that something has control of them at such a young age.
And what do you've got? We're talking about obviously regulatory. We're way behind on what we should be doing on statewide, in my opinion, regulation-wise. But on the inside the school itself,
Sure.
What are your programs looking like? I mean, I'm assuming you've been modernizing as you go.
Oh yeah,
on these.
we update the handbook every year. So a few years ago, with our tobacco policy, we added in any electronic smoking device, because we knew that there's always going to be new technologies. So we knew whether we said e-cig or tobacco, we didn't want any loopholes. So
Yeah, I gave you that language.
Thank you. So any electronic smoking device, we have, first and foremost, we'll have your traditional discipline, which would be probably an in-school suspension. We don't want to send kids out of school because then they're just left at home to their own devices. We keep you in school. We talk to you about it. There's a cessation program with Martha McDonough, who's one of our school social workers, where students have to go for X number of hours. They have to write a letter of reflection. They really have to have a conversation about what they're doing to their health and why. And then there's steps beyond that as well. But so far, that's been pretty decent. Obviously, when we catch anybody vaping, it's usually actually in possession of. It's usually not in the action because it's so fast that you can't. It's very difficult. But when we do a search, some of the odd things that we find is that kids hold on to the Juul pods, like stacks of them, and they're empty. They're spent. So we don't understand. We see them in the trash on
trophies?
occasion.
Well, they can add other things to them.
Yeah,
All right.
but oftentimes there's a lot of them. So, if they're spent, there's always a question of like, why, we haven't figured that out yet. And those kids aren't going to tell us, yeah, I hold on to these for this reason.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me, just throw it in the trash barrel, but I'm not an active vapor.
Right.
So,
And I think that we also have a real challenge in figuring out what sort of cessation program actually works for kids. And the Truth Initiative, which you can just Google truthinitiative.org, is working with the Department of Public Health. They've created a new texting program where a kid can text anonymously if they want help quitting or if they just want to understand what vaping is. So we're hoping this is going to provide more help for these kids, especially now that there's an emergency order in place
right.
where they can't.
so that's the nicotine withdrawal.
Exactly.
We are concerned
We'll
about
start to
that.
see that.
So we sent out with the letter saying like, this is what's going on. We offered several programs, several links, say to get help for your child or to get help for yourself, and hopefully people take advantage of that. But like I said, we've seen it has ebbed and flowed. It was definitely spiked the most a few years ago, and there's been a steady decline. But every once in a while, there's another spike.
Yep.
At least at school, we're with them 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day. So there's a lot of time when we're not with them. We don't know what's going on.
And I would just add, just because I think this is really important, we're finding even kids that have never smoked tobacco start vaping. And those kids are 4 times more likely to start smoking combustible cigarettes. That's a really frightening fact.
I would anecdotally agree with that, saying that I'd imagine most kids that vape had never smoked a cigarette in their lives.
Yeah.
Right. But they're more likely to start.
To lead into
Right.
it. Right.
Certainly I'm concerned about that now, because cold turkey, again, I support Governor Baker 100%, but cold turkey is a It's a dangerous game.
I've got a few colleagues in the legislature who vape instead of smoking cigarettes, and they're right back out yesterday outside the State House at the designated smoking area, back on cigarettes. So it's certainly a moving target that we've got to deal with here. But let me wrap up and thank Dennis and Cheryl for coming on today. On the front lines of what we're dealing with on the vaping epidemic, and doing yeoman's work, as I said a little earlier, in helping us to address it, understand it, and hopefully curb it. So thank you both very much for coming on. Thank you for your continued work in the community for both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Dennis, I'll try to do better on the intro next time for you as well.
I'll see you Friday night. Keep your head up.
Thanks very much. Governor Baker's recent declaration of a public health emergency and his related 4-month ban on vaping products is a short-term measure designed to provide the state some time to figure out what is causing this recent rash of health emergencies related to vaping. It's not a solution. E-cigarettes are not healthy, but they are profitable and exceedingly popular. Leading e-cigarette maker Juul saw its device sales increase from 2.2 million to more than 16.2 million in 1 year alone. Studies estimate that e-cigarette sales exceed $1.5 billion annually. And until the recent health emergencies hit the headlines, were projected to overtake traditional cigarette sales. Big tobacco companies, relentless in their drive for profits, have invested substantial funds into the growth of e-cigarettes, with some even funding studies to show the health advantages of vaping compared to traditional smoking. And in fact, Juul just announced that its new CEO is a veteran big tobacco executive. With that industry driving sales, perhaps it should not come as a surprise that we've seen a precipitous climb in e-cigarette usage among our children. Companies market and sell e-cigarette products with flavors such as Blue Raz lemonade, cream cookie, cotton candy, and grape bubblegum, to name only a few. Call me crazy, but I don't think these flavors are intended for older users. And these efforts by the industry are having the desired impact. The number of American students who used a vaping device in 2018 was 1.5 million more than those who had used one in 2017. In Massachusetts alone, we've seen a 78% increase in e-cigarette usage among high school students and a 48% increase among middle school students in the past year. Put plainly, we're in the throes of a vaping epidemic in our teenage and preteen population. And until very recently, state and federal governments have been slow to address this health crisis. The e-cigarette industry has largely flourished as a result. Our governments are now beginning to answer the call, and the good news is that we know how to attack this type of health problem because we've done it before. Traditional cigarette usage among teenagers is almost non-existent, thanks in part to government regulations and pricing, and in part to education initiatives. Using regulations on advertising and products, government effectively shut down previous tobacco industry efforts to market to our children. For example, back in 1997, the Federal Trade Commission charged that R.J. Reynolds directly marketed to children with its cartoon character Joe Camel. The tobacco giant ceased using the character in its advertising altogether as a result. Similarly, in 2009, the federal government prohibited flavors, as we said, other than menthol, in all cigarettes. We also know that increased pricing on cigarettes works. Every 10% increase in cigarette prices reduces youth smoking by about 7%. Yet Massachusetts currently imposes no excise tax at all on e-cigarettes and other vape products. This is inconsistent with the way we treat cigarettes, cigars, and other traditional tobacco products, and I'm hopeful that we'll remedy this oversight soon in the legislature. I'm also confident that if we do, the results will track the drops we've seen in youth smoking. I'm happy that we in the Massachusetts legislature are using what we know to be effective in moving forward with other measures to curb teen vaping. Last July, thanks to the tireless advocacy of people like our guest, Cheryl Sabara, and our students, Governor Baker signed into law a bill that I co-sponsored that raised the age to purchase any tobacco product from 18 to 21. This year, I've co-sponsored legislation that would bring e-cigarettes in line with traditional cigarette products by including a prohibition against flavored e-cigarettes. That legislation and related legislation is now advancing through the House, and we are finally on the right track. I encourage you at home to speak with your teenagers and our youth about the prevalence of e-cigarette usage in their ranks. Once you do, I invite you to support the work done in this area by our local coalitions for safer communities and to be vocal about changes in the law you want to see. We owe it to our children to do better, and I'm confident that we will. Thank you to WinCam, Executive Director Dave Gauthier, Operations Manager Suzette Ferdinand, Government Access Coordinator John Eric O'Neill, and thanks to you for tuning in.